Hello everyone, in this tutorial we're going to make a simple HTML5 game for kids. It's the classic spot the difference game where you have two similar pictures and the player has to identify the areas where they differ. We're going to use this picture, and I have two versions of it. This is one and this is another. So there are 6 differences between these two pictures, and they may look like obvious differences, but for a child it's not so easy. I've prepared some other assets as well to use in this game. A few pictures, a transparent image, and a font. So first of all, let's go to clockworkchili.com, because we're going to use Wade. That is going to make things much easier. Just click Get Started Now and skip the tutorials. We're going to create a new project. I'm going to call it Spot the Difference. So this is going to create a blank project, and now I'm going to import my assets into it. First of all, I'm right-clicking here and selecting New Folder. I'm creating an Images folder where I want to put my images. You don't have to do this, but I just like to be really tidy. So I have imported my images now, and I'll also drag and drop my font. It has to be a WOF format font. I'm going to drag it into the project, and in fact actually I'm also going to rename it because I really don't like this name. I'm just going to call it Comic, which is easier. Okay, so let's go into our images folder, and let's start by dragging one of these images into the scene. Now, one important thing that we have to decide now is what resolution we want to work at. I think for this type of game we want a fixed resolution, so if we deselect everything by clicking the background, we can change these properties here. If you just set the same size, the same values for min size and max size, this means that we'll be working at a fixed resolution of 1920 by 1080. It's pretty high resolution, but it's going to be alright because the game is essentially static, and Wade knows how to optimize that very well. I'm also going to place this image on, say, layer 10, so it's in the background, and we can easily put other things in front of it. So where do I position it? I go to its properties, and I want to set its Y position to 0, so it's exactly in the middle of the screen vertically, and on the x-axis I want minus 1920 over 4. You know, you can type arithmetic expressions in here and Wade will understand them, and this makes everything a bit easier, so you do not have to go to the calculator every time you want to position a sprite exactly. So I'm going to drag the other image into here, and once again I set its position to 0 on Y and 1920 over 4 on X. So these two pictures all together, they take up an area of 1920 by 1080, and this is the fixed resolution that we are using. Oh, I forgot to change the layer here to 10 as well. So now if I run the project, as you can see, these two pictures take up all of the window. Even if this window is not 1920 by 1080, it's actually much smaller. Wade scales everything down automatically, and if I resize the window, everything gets resized just to fit the screen, but always preserving the aspect ratio of the game. And this is what it means to work at a fixed resolution of 1920 by 1080 in this case. Okay, now let's start to actually make the game. First of all, I want to rename these objects. I'll call them back 0 and back 1, because by default everything is called like scene object 0, scene object 1, and so on, and it may get a bit confusing, so I like to give names to my objects. I'm also going to drag this red circle into the scene, and I'm going to position it near the earring here, as you have noticed, this girl has a earring and this one doesn't. So this is one of the differences between these two images. Now I'm going to resize it as well, and I'm going to rotate it a bit so it actually matches the difference area quite well. I'm also going to call this difference 0. Okay, this is always visible, but that's not what we want. Obviously we want to hide it, and then when the player clicks here, we show the red circle to say, okay, you've spotted one of the differences. So I'm going to use a trick here. I'm going to add a new sprite to this same object by clicking the new sprite button, and here I'm going, instead of this procedural square image, this white square that it's using by default, I'm going to use my transparent.png image. And I'll show you why I'm doing this. So if we go to sprite 0, to the red circle, we'll just copy its size and paste it here. So the transparent sprite and the red circle have exactly the same size. Why am I doing this? Okay, I'm going to show you now. Okay, let's go to the functions of this object, and let's go to the onMouseDown function. This function is executed when the user clicks or taps on a touch screen on this object. So what happens then? We will just get the sprite 0 and make it visible. Set visible true. Obviously by default we want the sprite to be invisible. So now you understand why I have that transparent sprite there. It's because, as you can see, when I click here, I'm still able to select that object even though the red circle is invisible, because I'm actually selecting the transparent sprite. And then this function, when the game is running, this function is going to get executed, which is saying show the red circle. So if I run the game and I click here, the red circle appears. So it's all good, it's all working, and it's quite nice, but it's not exactly what we want. I mean, it's part of it, it's a good start, but in reality we shouldn't assume that the player is going to click this area to identify a difference. They might as well click this area here on the other picture and it should still work. So, you know, I could just repeat the process and duplicate essentially this red circle, this difference object, and place it manually here over the ear of the other girl. But I want to do this in code because it's going to save time, since I've got to do this for 6 differences in the pictures. So instead of editing onMouseDown, we should go to onAddToScene. This function is executed when the object is added to the scene. So in this case, it's executed when the scene is loaded. Okay, here I'm going to create a clone of this object by doing this dot clone. So this clone, I want to position it relative to the position of this object. I just want to add half the screen size, half the screen width horizontally, and I want to use the same position as this object vertically. So it's going to appear exactly here in the same place on the other picture. And obviously I want to add it to the scene. Add the clone to the scene. So, you know, I'm automatically adding another object, so it should work when I click here and when I click here. However, it's not quite right. It's not going to work like this, and I'll show you why. So let's run the game. and it still works, but if we open the debugging console by pressing F12, we will see an error. There we go. A maximum call stack size exceeded. And there are a bunch of onAddToScene function calls here, and I'll explain what's happening. So basically I have created a clone of this object, and when I clone this object I clone all of its functions as well. So when this object is added to the scene, it creates a clone and adds it to the scene. When the clone is added to the scene, this function is executed again for the clone, and so on. So it's infinite recursion. What we want to do instead is remove the onAddToScene method for the clone by just setting it to null before adding it to the scene. So it doesn't get into that infinite recursion. It only creates a clone, adds it to the scene, period. The clone doesn't clone itself. Okay, so now if I actually press F12 again and clear the console log and then run the game, we can see that there are no errors, and I can click here and it works. I can click here and it works. Obviously this is not quite what we want. I mean, when I click one of them, I want both circles to appear. So if I go back to my onMouseDown function, I'll also close the debugging console for now. Actually, no, let's go back to onAddToScene, and I want to store a reference to my cloned object. So this cloned object equals clone, and also clone.clonedObject equals this. So what does it mean? This means that this object now is linked to the clone. The cloned object property of this object is the clone, and the cloned object property of the clone is this object. So now if I go back to onMouseDown, when I set my sprite to visible, I also want to do this for this .cloned object. So I set both to visible. Now save again, run, and as you can see, I click here, both appear, and it would work the other way around. So I click here, both circles appear. So this is working correctly. Now let's make it even better. I want to edit app.js. So if we go back to our root folder, there is a file called app.js, and this is the file that defines what happens in our Wade app. At the moment it's pretty simple. So when the app is initialized, a scene is loaded, which is this scene1.wsc that we're editing now, and that's it. Nothing else happens. This is a good place to define variables that will be used everywhere in our app. So I'm going to define one, which is num_differences_found, and I'm going to initialize it to 0. I'm also defining another one which says how many differences there are in the scene. I think there are 6 in this case, so we'll just initialize it to 6. I can then refer to these variables, and I'll show you how from here, from the member functions of my objects. So when I find the difference, like in this case, I will do wait.app.num_differences_found++. So I'm going to increment this counter. And I'm also going to say if I found all the differences, so if wait.app num_differences_found equals wait.app total differences, then I've found all of them and it's game over. So I'm going to call a function called game over. and I need to create this function in app.js. So this.gameover equals function, and here we will do something when the game is over. For now, I'll just say wait.clear scene, so just remove everything from the scene when the game is over, and then we will improve it. But for now, so just so we know that it's working. So I'm going to, before I run this, obviously there is a problem that I am aware of, and it's the fact that I can keep clicking on this, and I will keep counting it as a new difference that I've found between the two pictures. I want to prevent that, so I want this code to be executed only once. There are a few ways of doing this, so let's do it in this simple way. We should set a flag on this object. I'm calling it this.wasFound and setting it to true following a click. Here, actually I'm going to run this code only if not this was found. By doing it this way, I am ensuring that this code is only run once. Well, not quite. I am missing a bit. So if not this was found and not this cloned object was found, then I want to run this code. Okay, excellent. So now this should work. And if I run the game, it shouldn't be very different actually, it should be exactly the same as what we had before. So I can click this and it registers as a difference, but even if I keep clicking it, it's not increasing this num differences found counter up to 6. It's only counting it once. But now I'm going to create copies of this object, and I'll show you how to do that. It's very easy. Just select the object and either Ctrl-D or duplicate object. You see this button here. I'm going to use this button, and actually I'm going to make the red circle visible just to make it easier to work with. So I'm going to duplicate this object, and this has created a clone. I'm going to call this clone difference 1, and I'm also going to position it somewhere appropriate so the lips are different. So maybe I'll just place it here, and then I'm going to create another clone which I'm going to call difference 2, and this one I'm going to place it around the eyes of the girl. So about I think it's about there. Okay, then I'm going to create yet another clone which I'm going to call difference 3, and this is going to be placed here around the bracelet. It's about, I would say it's about this size. Yeah, we can make it a bit bigger still, and we rotate it a bit. Okay, and then so we've got 4, we've got another 2, so difference 4 is going to be you know, the armband that she's got here. Actually I will set the size on this picture because it's a little bit easier, and let's see, there we go. But for consistency I'm just placing it here on this other picture. Okay, and then the last one, clone this again, call it difference 5, and I'm gonna place it here around the crown. So let's have a look. It's about this size, I think. It's a bit bigger actually, so I think this will do. This will do. Maybe a little bit taller. It's too tall. So yeah, let's say that this is about right here. A bit shorter still. Okay, we don't need to be too precise. I mean, people will tend to click on the middle of the difference areas. Okay, so now we've placed all of our difference objects. So if we run the game now, we should be able. Oops, I forgot to make them invisible. So let's go back and make everything invisible. And then when we run the game, we should be able to click on all of them and find all the differences. And when it's found all of them, it should trigger this game over function and clear the scene. Now let's see if that works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And game over. Perfect. Okay, so this is good, but we want to give the players some more feedback when they find a difference. We also want to tell them how many they're supposed to find. So let's close up.js and let's go back to our images folder. I have this top bar here. It's a UI element. It's a bit too tall actually. Let's make it smaller. And then, by the way, if you click your mouse wheel and drag, then that's going to move the camera, which is what I'm doing now. Okay, so I'm going to the properties of this object. I want to make sure it's horizontally centered perfectly. So I set its X position to 0. And I'll leave the Y position as it is. I think it looks pretty much correct. And I'm also going to add some objects on top of it. I'll call this top bar. I've prepared these dots. So let's see, I'll place one here. Let's say I want to be quite precise on the positioning of this. So -75. And I'm going to add another sprite to it, which is not the procedural square one. No, it's just going to be this green dot that I've created here, and use the full size of it. Okay, so I'll also make this invisible. The idea is I'm going to have 6 of these gray dots up here, and as the player uncovers the differences, then I'm going to make the green sprites visible to make it easier to count the differences. So green sprite is initially invisible. This is going to be called, well, I'll think about the names in a minute. I'll show you why we should have a consistent naming convention for these. But anyway, for now I'm just going to duplicate this object, and I'm going to place it at its current position -150, and I'm going to duplicate it again, and this is going to be at the current position -150. Oops, -150. So it looks about right. Okay, then I duplicate this again and add 150 to its position, then duplicate this and add 150, duplicate this and add 150. So I've got 6 of them now, and I'm going to use a consistent naming convention. So starting from the left, I'll select the leftmost dot and I'm going to call it dot 0. Then I'll select the next one. Oops, I'll select the next one. I'm going to call it dot 1. And then this one will be dot 2. And so on. We have dot 3. We have dot 4. And you guessed it, it's dot 5. Okay, so why do I really care about these names? Okay, I'm going to show you now. When let's select one of these difference objects and let's go back to its functions. So when this is clicked, I want to increase the counter, and also I'm going to select the corresponding dot and turn it green. So which dot do I want to use? I'm going to do wait.getSceneObject, which is a function used to get a scene object by name, dot plus wait.app.nomDifferencesFound. Actually, I'll do this before incrementing. Okay, so this is going to give me .0 for the first difference that I find, and then the second time this is going to be .1, and then .2, and so on. So this dot, I'm going to get its second sprite, so get sprite 1, set visible true. Okay, so unfortunately now I'm going to have to copy and paste this code into the functions of the other objects. Obviously there is a better way of doing this, which involves using behaviors, but I want to keep this tutorial really simple, so I'm just going to do some copying and pasting, which isn't too bad because we only have 6 of these anyway. Okay, so if I run the game now, as I uncover the differences, as you can see, this is probably placed a little bit too low, but anyway, as I uncover the differences, these dots turn green in the correct order, and then when the last one is clicked, it's game over. Okay, now let's polish the game a little bit. It's fully functional, but it could still be improved. So first of all, we said this should probably be a little bit higher up, like here, and we want to add some text to serve as an introduction. We should tell the player to spot the difference. So let's see, we can add a new scene object by creating a new scene object with this button here, and as usual this is going to use the default procedural square sprite. In reality, I do not want a sprite, I want a text sprite, so I'm just clicking this new text sprite button, and the text is going to be spot the difference. It's really tiny. I'll zoom in so you can see it better, but it's really tiny. We want it to be much bigger. So instead of 12 pixels, let's do 128 or something, which, 128 is going to be better. And I want it to be center aligned. And at this point I think I can easily remove this white square by clicking this minus button on the sprite 0. Okay, so we're left with the text only in this object, and I don't like this font very much. It's just plain Arial. I want a more interesting font. Luckily I've got it here. It's this comic.wof, but to use it I need to deselect everything. So you can click on the background, or you can click here on the scene name to bring up the scene properties. Now, if I open the Fonts tab, I can add comic to my scene. And when I've done this, I can go back here and say, instead of Arial, I want to use my comic font. So you see, it looks much, much better. I'm going to change the color as well, make it blue. And it's difficult to read because there is a lot going on in the background, but an easy way to make it more visible is to add some shadows. So I'll add a white shadow, and I'll set a shadow blur of 20, something large. So yeah, it's much more visible now. So this is going to be here, say for a couple of seconds, and then we'll make it disappear. Okay, I'll go to the properties, I'll rename it intro text. Okay, so how do I make it disappear? I could, go to its functions, on add to scene. I could do this. I could set timeout function. I'm going to define a function that's executed after 2000 milliseconds. So after 2 seconds, I want this to fade out. So okay, I'll just avoid closures now. I'll just keep it simple. Var text object equals wait.getScene object intro text. Note that I cannot really use the this keyword in here because we are not in a member function of intro text. We are in a function that's inside the set timeout, so it's in the global scope. So I couldn't really do like this dot set visible false. It wouldn't work. I need to do text object dot set visible false. Or if you want to use closures, there is a nicer way, but again, I want to keep this simple. So if I run the game now, 1, 2, and it disappears after 2 seconds. But it's a bit abrupt, so I want it to fade out instead. And how do we do that? It's quite easy actually, but I want to show you how it can be even easier by just going to clockworkchili.com and going to projects, and then on page 2, I believe, there is a fade behavior. This is something that's been made by someone else, and it's a little demo. As you can see, you click this button and things fade out, and then if you click it again, maybe they fade back in. I don't know, I thought they would. But anyway, yes, I can download this, and it's downloading a zip file that contains a bunch of files, but the only one we really need is fade.js. So this is a behavior. I'm going to show you what it means. First of all, I want to import it into the project. And once again, just to be tidy, I'm going to create a new folder called behaviors, and in here I'm going to drag my fade.js file. So we can open it and edit it if you want, but we don't really care about this code. What we care about is this has a fade out and fade in function. In reality, we just care about fade out for now. So I'll close this, and I'll go to the properties, I'll go to the behaviors tab of my object, and oh yeah, nothing is available here. And this is because I need to add this behavior to my scene. I need to add this script to my scene. So let's go back to the scene properties by selecting the scene and open the scripts tab and add fade.js. Okay, now if I select my object and go to the behaviors tab, fade is available as a behavior. And when I add it, it adds this fade component to my object. There are a couple of properties here, and we'll just ignore them for the time being. What we're going to do instead, we're going to go back to the onAddToScene function, and instead of saying set visible false, we're going to do text object dot get behavior dot fade out. So let's see if it works. Just press run. 1, 2, and then it fades out. Fantastic, it looks much nicer. So the only thing that's left now really is this game over condition, which is really a bit ugly at the moment. It just, disappears completely. So what we want to do instead, I don't know, but it must be something nicer, right? So let's go back to app.js, and our game over function, instead of doing clear scene, what can we do? I think maybe we should add another text element like this intro text. In fact, I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to place another one here that says well done. Well done. And this is going to appear when the game is over. So I want to change its position so it's horizontally centered. Actually, this one too. And I'm also going to hide it for the time being. So this is invisible. And on game over, well, I want to rename this. Actually, I want to call it game over text. So on game over, we will just do wait.getSceneObject game over text dot set visible true. Okay, this is going to be a bit nicer, I think. Let's see what happens. So game runs. After 2 seconds, this fades out. We spot all the differences, and well done. Okay, brilliant. I think this is a fairly complete game now. Obviously, you know, there's more you could do, and for example, you could, on game over, you could load another scene by just doing wait load scene, I don't know, like scene2.wsc, if you wanted to go to the next level, for example. But I'll leave that to you. I mean, you can do whatever you like when the game is over. For this tutorial, this is probably enough. What I want to show you is that you can download your game that you've just made. Just select download source code, and this will download a zip file. And this zip file will contain a spot the difference folder, which will contain everything that's in our project. And importantly, it's got an index.html, so this is basically a website that you can run in your browsers. If you have Firefox, you just double click index.html and it just works. And when it's so big, it's actually quite nice, isn't it? It looks pretty good. Well done. On other browsers, there is a little bit of fiddling to do to get them to run local files, but if you want to upload it to a web server, then it's going to work flawlessly in all possible browsers, including mobiles. And note that even if we're using functions that are called on mouse down, these will be automatically translated to whatever input device is available. So if you have a touch screen, this will just work. There's nothing you have to do. Wade will take care of that. So that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel so when we release new video tutorials you do not miss them. See you soon.